Hello and welcome to A Conversation on the Daily Bern. I'm your host, Eric Miller, joined today by an awesome progressive from the great state of California, Mayor Lamar Thorpe. How you doing, Lamar?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, and my apologies for the delay there.
No worries, no worries. You were joking with me that once you're the mayor, you're not late. You're just the mayor is delayed, right? Which is like a privilege. I lost your audio there for a second. Hopefully your audio is still good. Can you say
Yes.
something?
Can
Okay,
you hear
great.
me? You can hear
Great,
me.
yep.
Right.
So you made a bit of a splash. You were just inaugurated or sworn in December, and a picture of you wearing a Bernie shirt and you're swearing in went a little bit viral. And I wanna ask you about that. And I'll play the clip just kind of behind us because it's the coolest thing, right? So here you are. I just what about Bernie inspires you, and what inspired you to wear the shirt on that special day for you personally?
It's funny about that moment is that I wore my Bernie shirt, but I had no idea I was gonna even record the swearing in.
Right.
So I just wore my Bernie shirt because that was technically the official swearing in, because we have to be sworn in public, right, in person.
Right.
I went down to City Hall, and as I was walking into the clerk's office, the incoming vice mayor of Antioch was walking out because she had just been sworn in. And I said, "Oh, can you do me a favor and maybe snap a picture of me as I get sworn in officially?" Because we're going to have our ceremony later that week on Zoom. And she says, "Oh, no, not a problem." And I said, "Well, while you're at it, just record it. I want to have a memory of this."
Of
And
course.
I'll be honest, I had no clue it was going to go viral or semi-viral. And so she recorded it, and then I put it up on all these different social media posts, just to have, because it was my official swearing in as the mayor.
Of course.
And no one paid attention to me other than I was wearing a Bernie shirt.
No, it's great. And when I saw it went viral, and obviously I invited you onto the show and did a little bit of research, and I just want to ask you a little bit. On your website, it's lamarthorpe.com. Now, obviously, you're the official mayor, so this is kind of a campaign-oriented site, right?
Right.
But there's something really great in here. So I want to just point people to it. We don't have to get into it necessarily, but there's a series of videos. You have, a really incredible background and life story. And, I don't want to really dig into all that necessarily, but, please go watch Lamar's story because it's really great. And there's these 3 awesome videos here. So I encourage anyone to go to Lamar Thorpe and check out Lamar's story because it's absolutely incredible. What I want to, in lieu of that, I want to ask you just kind of, what animated you politically, and maybe it's wrapped up in that. I'm sure it largely is, but what animated you politically?
I grew up in in East Los Angeles, and growing up there, where I specifically grew up in El Sereno, there was always, you grew up with this issue known as the 710 extension, which was the 710 freeway was never completed. And the 710 freeway ran from Long Beach, was supposed to run from Long Beach all the way to South Pasadena and connect to the 210, which makes sense. But for whatever reason, I don't know all the history of why it was never completed. All I know is that I grew up in a section that should have been my home should have been the slow lane of the 710 freeway.
Right.
And it was not. What was interesting about that entire situation was that Caltrans' proposal was to build the freeway, have it run through El Sereno, and Caltrans had bought out all these homes in my community. My parents owned their home, but a lot of our homes there were Caltrans homes, we referred to them. And Caltrans, for people who don't know, is the California kind of Department of Transportation. So they were going to build the freeway and then put 2 sound walls up above ground. And then when they got to South Pasadena in the white community, they were going to go underground to preserve everybody's home. And then they called every white person's home historic and that it needed to be preserved. And the Mexicans who lived in El Sereno, where I grew up, were going to have their homes demolished and then
Right.
have this freeway, run over their home. And it was such an insult to
Yeah.
the people of my community. And so we grew up, opposing the 710 extension. And interestingly enough, we didn't grow up understanding the racial dynamics that I just described. We just didn't believe in you demolishing our homes. But as I got older, I started to recognize, wow, the lack of value by public institutions of people of color, how disgusting. And so, that's how I got involved in politics and, in these meetings, like, opposing the 710 extension. I got to meet politicians locally, our city council members, our state assembly members, and whatnot. And so I was out knocking on doors, telling people to oppose the 710 extension. And then, I think after that, I started working on political campaigns, and then I started kind of going from there. Ironically, you would not believe this, but when I registered to vote, I registered as a Republican.
Right.
And so I was a Republican for a number of years. And it probably, to your point, it had a lot to do with my growing up. My parents were from Mexico. They immigrated here. But what your audience probably doesn't know is that my parents adopted me. My biological family did not raise me, and they were African American, and my
Right.
family who raised me were Mexican. And so my parents were Democrats, but I always felt that I always needed to create some level of distance between me and Black people, because I didn't like Black people, because I wasn't raised by them, and I always felt different, and I didn't. So I had issues with race, of course, and so being a Republican was the easiest way to say I'm not part of that group.
Oh, and that would make you a popular Republican because
that would make me a hugely popular Republican.
Right.
Clearly, I grew up and have a lot more sense now than what I did back then.
Yeah. Thankfully, thanks for all of us.
God,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And I didn't mean to gloss over that, but I didn't want to necessarily focus on that, because that's not all of who you are and where you're
Right.
at, in your career and so forth. Right. So, but, feel free to talk about it. You, like you said, raised in foster care, and it's just really compelling. And, to your credit and your drive, and you're a veteran, and, you've worked all over the world and so forth. And, you held a seat in city council. Let's talk a little bit about some of your accomplishments in city council. I know you worked on like housing insecurity. Can you talk about, some of the things, that you feel proud of that you did while serving in city council?
Well, right. When I was explaining to you off the air that as a council member, you don't have the luxury of controlling the agenda. The mayor sets the agenda. The mayor can do whatever they want as it relates to the agenda. And so I had to use the ad hoc committee structure in order to advance some of the ideas that I thought were important. Homelessness or the issue of residents who were unhoused was a huge issue. And not just here in Antioch, but throughout the Bay Area, throughout California, and throughout the nation. This is a growing problem. And now with COVID, good heavens, it's going to be a huge issue that all local municipalities are going to have to be dealing with post-COVID.
Right.
And so, but I came at it, begrudgingly. I was actually evangelized by a colleague who said, this is an issue we need to address. And so we got, we started working at that. It's important to understand that local municipal governments are good at a few things: public works, police departments, parks and recreation, and community planning. You're planning, and that's all we really do at the end of the day as cities, right? That's literally our bread and butter operation. So anything outside of that is like rolling a boulder up a hill. Right. And so while it's been 2 years in working on the homeless issue, I'm proud that, we were able to hire or create a position called the Unhoused Resident Coordinator to help us coordinate some activities with restrooms, toiletries, and whatnot, and getting laundry services to those who are on our streets and vulnerable. But right now, we're literally on the 23rd, because I get to control the agenda, we'll be placing the idea of master leasing a hotel here locally with 32 rooms so that we can develop this concept called bridge housing, and really kind of massaging that through so that we can get folks from off the streets, but in particular chronically homeless, off the streets into bridge housing, stabilize their lives, and then hopefully get them in partnership with the county into permanent housing. And for some people, that means it's permanent supportive housing. Right. But what I think is relevant to what you're describing, or the context of your show here, is that back in when Senator Sanders announced his campaign for president in 2015, I believe it was.
Right.
I didn't know who he was. I didn't know Bernie Sanders. I didn't have anything much to do with him. What I do remember is that I thought it was interesting that this crazy guy was going to run against Hillary Clinton because she was clearly going to trounce him in the election. And I was probably already committed to Hillary Clinton. It wasn't until I watched an interview he did with George Stephanopoulos,
Stephanopoulos, right? That guy.
His show on one of the morning Sunday shows. And I watched the interview and I thought, oh, this is interesting. And there was a point where George asked Senator Sanders, so I can, and I'm just paraphrasing. He says, I can see it now when the Republican attack ads come out and say, oh, Bernie Sanders wants this. And oh, Bernie Sanders wants Medicare for all. And he wants free college. And he wants to be like these Scandinavian countries. And he said, or Senator Sanders' response was, that's right. That's right. And what's wrong with being like these countries who afford their people Medicare for all, who take care of their most vulnerable? And I sat there and I thought to myself, that is the first time I've ever seen anyone stand up for a progressive agenda without being shy about it, without having any second thoughts about it. And I thought, I'm voting for that guy.
Awesome.
I'm voting for him. And I was committed. And I thought I was committed during the Obama campaign. During the Obama campaign, when I was in college, I rented a minivan, and I was a graduate student, and I rented a minivan, and I got some of my undergraduate friends, and I said, we're going to South Carolina to campaign for Senator Obama. And we went down there and spent like a weekend there getting people to the polls and whatnot. This time, when Bernie came to Nevada, when we were having the Nevada caucuses, I told my partner at the time, my wife, I said, Pat, I'm leaving. I'm going to Bernie weekend in Nevada. And look, there's this app. You get free housing. You do all this different stuff. I'm going. And she thought I was kidding. And I packed my bag one Friday morning, went to work at the University of the Pacific, left the work that day and drove off to Nevada. And she literally called me halfway there. She's like, you're really going to Nevada? I said, yeah, I'm halfway there. We got to get him elected.
Wow. Yeah, Nevada was that was the one with the throwing chairs BS, right? That was
all that nonsense.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I hold people like Dolores Huerta in very high esteem. But I was very disappointed in some of the antics that I saw including her as it related to that campaign. I was just disgusted. But I still regard people like her, but it was one of those disappointing moments where I just shook my head and said, see, this is why we shouldn't hold any human being on a mantle, because we're all not perfect.
Of course. Yeah. So did that motivate you? Obviously that activism, like you said, going back to when you were a kid, even before you were aware of the racial components and so forth, you knew that it was just wrong, right? So you were animated by activism and justice at a young age. Did this cement the possibility, that guy is at that level, I need to get involved? Did that inspire you to run for city council?
No, I've always run for something. When I was in high school, I ran for president 3 times. And 3 times my student colleagues said no. And then, but I did run for vice president. I was elected vice president of the student body.
Okay.
And so, but I probably didn't have the right temperament to be holding those types of offices back then. And I certainly, and I didn't appreciate what it means to serve the public in elected office. And so, when I was actually at George Washington, I was when I was in the Navy, I started going to night school at Three Rivers Community College when I lived in Connecticut, and I was elected secretary of the student government.
Great.
And our big issue there was there was this issue where we had 2 campus locations, and the governor had not picked which location the campus should be built on. And my activism continued there because we were like, well, what difference does it make? We need a facility. What are you waiting on? I don't care about the politics around where the location needs to be. You just need to pick a site so that students have a place to learn. And so even in the Navy, I was active. I was I remember driving up to New Hampshire for the New Hampshire primary when John Kerry was running for president.
Oh, nice. Right.
Out there in the snow in Nashua and whatnot. Oh yeah, but not organized. Just me, myself, and I'd drive up to these different places, and then from there I went to George Washington University and really got a taste of all the great stuff that it means to serve the public in elected office by being 3 blocks from the White House, down the street from the Capitol, across the street from the State Department, watching all these things in action, how literally this little place in the world called Washington, D.C. Impacts so many people's lives. And it seems so seamless because you're just there.
Right. Yeah.
There are people who you're walking by who,
Yeah. I want to ask a little bit about what you're working on and so forth now that you're mayor, right? Like you said, you can control the agenda, but before we do that, I like to give my guests an opportunity to brag on their district or their town. So brag on Antioch. What should we know about that? About your city, about your town?
Antioch, well, it's one of the oldest cities in California. It sits on Miwok land, Miwok Indians. This was their land, or is their land, we this is a wonky thing, but all of politics in California revolves around water. Every aspect of California is water. And so we are one of those cities that has what they call historic pre-1914 water rights. And so that means we can draw water directly from the Delta and provide it to residents, unlike any other city in California. So generally there are water agencies. We have this huge water system here in California, and we're one of the very few cities that can directly provide water to its residents. We have a growing industry in cannabis, so we will one day be home as soon as we break ground in the coming months. Contra Costa Farms is located here. We will be the third largest indoor cultivation facility in the country. So. Great. Cannabis is a growing industry in our community, and it's going to expect to have a huge impact.
Great. You know what? Since you mentioned that before, I'm not, just to interrupt your flow, put a pin in that. Didn't you work on city council about sort of normalizing it or regulating it a little bit more as well, cannabis?
Yeah. Oh, I don't want to say I wrote the policy, but I wrote the damn policy.
We're all friends here.
And so. So we got cannabis here, and that was a huge fight. That was a 3-2 vote, kicking and screaming. We brought people and that was after Prop 64, which legalized cannabis here in California, passed. I voted against Prop 64. And
when you were you were a Republican at that time?
No. I was still a Democrat. I just had my own, because I was, and this is where interesting. My story informs my thinking, but. I was born in prison and raised in foster care. And so a lot of what I understood as to my mother being incarcerated most of her life and not ever seeing her until I was 22 came from my understanding of her drug use. And so anything that had to do with the proliferation of what I saw as drugs, I'm not for. And it takes me a long time to get there. But when I saw how overwhelmingly voters passed it, I said, well, I still, as a policymaker, have an obligation to the public to at least study the issue. And we did, and I learned a lot.
Hopefully the mayor will be dialing back in.
Are we back?
There we are.
I don't know what happened, but something happened.
Yeah, you're so when you got to legalization, you got there right on time, basically. You were right in the right position to make the positive difference, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. And, you know, the story with your mom and foster care, again, that's on Lamar's website, and it's, you know, it's compelling. And, you know, to your credit, you know, like you said, it informed your thinking and worldview. But not only that, like in this example, like you evolved, right? You learned, you grow, right? And, you know, that's absolutely incredible, you know. So, you know, kudos to you, my friend. You know, let me ask, you know, just some other like you I interrupted your flow. I was having you brag on your district, and I put a pin in that. So let's get back to that if you don't mind.
So that's Antioch. We sit at the we literally have a front door to the Delta, the San Francisco Bay, and it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. It's actually, in my opinion, it's the center of the universe because you're a few miles away from the ocean, and then you're a few miles away from the mountains and the
Excellent.
snow and whatnot. And so it's a fascinating place to be.
Excellent. So what are some other frontline issues that, you know, now you've been in office for like 2 months? I'm assuming you've fixed everything by now. But if that's not the case, like what are some frontline issues that you're working on that, you know, that are your priorities that you want to
Right.
discuss?
Well, number one is police reform. That's a huge issue. I would say second to that is homelessness. Third, youth programming, and human services, and I list those three things because again, you know, cities aren't good at those. Aren't I'm not gonna. Those aren't things that cities do. We do parks and recreation. We don't
Right.
necessarily dwell down and drill down in youth programming and focus on the development of youth in our community. And we think we cede that over to the school district and assume that it's their responsibility, and it's not. It's our collective responsibility. And so police reform, interestingly enough, uh, was post George Floyd. I wrote this op-ed, and I talked about racism and even my lack of understanding watching, you know, the Rodney King beating when I was a small child and not understanding the racial dynamics that existed around I didn't understand the riots. I didn't understand any of that. And of
Right.
course that had to do with the fact that, you know, I just wasn't raised with black people and I didn't understand. I just didn't understand. And so when that happened, I put out an op-ed calling on our city to, you know, think through police reform and adopting the 8 can't wait recommendations, all of them.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it quickly, I'll have to tell you that, and not with everybody because clearly I'm the mayor, but it seemed to have spiraled out of control for other people, not for me, for other people, because they just couldn't deal with the fact that some black councilman had the nerve to say, oh, we should do police reform or we should consider reforms. I mean, oh my God, imagine that.
Right.
Someone from the impacted community having a suggestion about how not to have this occur in the future. And for a lot of people, for lack of a better term, the hoods were off, and I saw
Mhm.
clearly as to who they were. And these are people who I have since I don't communicate with them anymore because it's clear where they're at, and I don't want to be part of. I don't want to be part of that.
Right.
And so police reform efforts kind of went away, but they became a huge issue in the campaign. My ad hoc committee was voted down, and in lieu of some larger conversation blacks have been having since day one. Uh,
Right.
so, uh, but now I'm the mayor. We're still having our larger conversations, but March is dedicated to police reform. I look forward to discussing ways we can hold
Right.
police officers more accountable, not because I believe our police department is the worst one in the world, but to ensure that what happens across this nation regularly by law enforcement and African Americans doesn't happen here. And
Yeah.
so you have to be thoughtful. You have to be deliberate about that. And so I look forward to, you know, police reform. I look forward to accountability. I look forward for the independent investigations of high profile complaints. Body cameras. We don't have body cameras. And a host of other measures that I think will continue to make everyone in our community feel safe, not just some people.
Yeah, excellent on that. Yeah, then, and you know, we should point out, you know, just on that topic, today was Tamar Rice's birthday, right? So, you know, there's so many names and
Right.
so forth. We could any day would be somebody's birthday that but that's one of those. I mean, they're all brutal, but that one, so many, they just stick with you. You can't shake them, nor should you, right?
Mm-mm.
And as you were talking about writing that op-ed, and like you said, the hoods are off. That had a tactical advantage, right? So that it kind of blew their cover in local politics, so that, because you wrote that, they took the adversarial position, right? Because that's what they believe, right? And then thereby they were fully exposed, right? So, thanks to your op-ed. So that's a good tactic to do locally, because it will reveal, who the true enemy is, in a way. You know what I mean? So, you know, uh, brilliant move on that front as well. We talked about homelessness and housing insecurity, and let's get into the youth programs. The third thing that you mentioned, what do you hope to accomplish on that front?
Antioch, one of the things that I'm proud of Antioch is that when I moved here, uh, I'd never seen so many. Uh, we live in a very racialized world. We self-segregate. I've never been to a community where people are so integrated, and so Antioch is very integrated. I mean, over here, my neighbors, the Harmons, they're African Americans. Mr. Harmon came from Delaware. Mrs. Harmon grew up in Oakland. Over here, we have Abdul, who moved his family here from Afghanistan across the street. There's two Indian families. One is Sikh, one is second generation Indian. And I can go on and on about the integration of various races and cultures and ethnic groups here in Antioch. And I was blown away by that. And that's why I said I was happy to move here. What has struck me is that we have two zip codes in Antioch. One is like the second wealthiest zip code in East Contra Costa County, where we're at, and one of the more affluent ones in the county. And one is one of the poorest in the county.
Hmm.
And what is interesting is that the majority of African Americans who live in Antioch live in the 94531 zip code, which is the more wealthier one. Yet the narrative about Antioch is how somehow all these Black people moved to Antioch because of Section 8, when in fact, the reason we lead the Bay Area with the most people, or one of the cities, or in California with the concentration of so many people with advanced degrees, is because African Americans disproportionately have advanced degrees. African Americans have disproportionate numbers of home ownership here in Antioch. Right. And most African Americans are probably working some job in the inner core of the Bay Area, in Oakland, San Francisco, and yet we're talked about as if we're some burden on society here in Antioch. When it's not the case. So we're doing very well. When you look at our educational outcomes, there is a huge disparity between the status of African Americans overall and how they're doing in our public schools. We probably, we're disproportionately the students who have the worst state reading scores and the worst mathematical reading scores. Now, that's not just unique to African Americans, because the school system itself, 50% of our students don't meet the state reading and writing scores, and 60% of our students don't meet the mathematical standards of the state. So it's not just Black students. It's like,
right. But you said disproportionate. So what would the root causes of that be?
And so I don't know. That's a good question for the school system. I don't know. I have my suspicions. There are many African Americans like myself who send our children to private schools. There are many African Americans like my neighbors who send their children to the, like, we have a medical high school. Their daughter graduated from medical high school. There are a host of other private schools that African Americans send their children to, and then there's a lot of African Americans who take their children into the inner part of the Bay Area and to schools there where they're closer to where they work, because the commute time, people here on average commute an hour and a half to get back and forth to work. So there's that, and then I just think that there are systemic challenges in the school system that create challenges for learning.
Right.
78% of our students qualify for the free or reduced lunch program. So there's some challenges, but that yet exists in the middle of one of
Right.
the affluent. So
Interesting.
I don't. So it's odd. So it's
Yeah.
odd. Uh,
That the thing that you described, and about the more affluent kids get to go to schools elsewhere and so forth, right? Private schools and so forth. That actually makes the problem worse because it kind of leaves the
well,
public school
that
behind. Right?
that's my suspicion, is that we've left a lot of Black kids behind. We've left a lot of Latino children, even white children. Before any of this diversity existed in Antioch, Antioch was a white community, and historically a sundown town. I don't know if you're familiar with sundown towns,
Mm-mm.
where there were written and unwritten policies about people of color being in your community and then being chased
Right.
out by the police. But historically, this city has always been working class, working poor. It has never been, upper middle class or anything like that. So there, that exists too. But I think I think some folks, I think we've left a lot of folks behind in our public schools for the option of other things, and so that's my concern. I didn't have a choice. People say, "Oh, you have a choice because you got to send your daughter to a private school." Well, no, I worked in San Jose, which was 3 hours each way. Pat worked in Oakland, which was an hour and a half each way. We didn't have a choice but to have some type of after school and before school program or childcare availability. When I went to enroll my daughter into the public school, there wasn't any of that. They said, no, we don't have that. You have to figure that out.
Right.
And so I said, that's unacceptable. So the only option that existed, well, most of the private schools have that option. So my daughter goes to the local parochial school because we had to have that option in order to maintain our professions.
Right.
So um, so that's what it was for us. And that's why I get frustrated and I talk about youth programs, because we have to invest in that. We have to invest in
Right.
before and after school programs for all. I mean, if it's hard enough for the middle class people, imagine the people working paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
What option do they have?
Yeah.
And
Here.
so
Here.
every child should have a right to have access to some meaningful before after school program. Should have the right and access to some homework club where they get help to do their homework, because their parents may not be able to do it because they're on that long commute. And so there are a lot of options we can provide our young people. I get sick and tired of hearing these fake pro law enforcement people who say, well, if we just had more police, we'd solve all the crime. No, if you'd have these kids occupied and busy doing something meaningful, you'd reduce crime.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always have to be some armed police officer reducing crime. We can take other measures. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, youth programs plays a host of of can impact your community in a number of ways, not just individually.
Yeah. Here. Here. Absolutely. And that's one of that's one of the pillars of defund the police. It's not defund them to zero. It's take some money and apply it to excessive money and apply it to social programs like you're talking about, youth programs, after school programs, and so forth, right? And that will lower crime over time, rather than you know adding more hammers to the police force that are going to see everything as a nail, right?
Right, or not even just that, but just always I know in this city we've had this uh, mentality of, well, if it's an issue, we just turn it over to the police so that they can solve it. Homelessness is an issue. Well, let's create a community engagement team for the police
Yeah.
department so that they can deal with the homeless. And it's like,
Right.
well, number one, they didn't sign up to be social workers.
Right.
They signed up to fight crime. They signed up to solve crime. They signed up to maintain the peace. They signed up to do all these various things. They didn't sign up to be social workers. And I'm sure some of them have it in their heart to want to be that, but that's not what they were trained to do.
Right.
And so we need to stop putting the burden on law enforcement to solve all of our issues. I'm sorry, the PAL program that the police department runs isn't going to exist in every single little school and isn't going to serve as the only after school outlet for young people. That's not how it works. And we shouldn't burden the police department with that.
Yeah.
And I can go on listing examples of how we just keep going after the police department as a way to solve all of our problems. And by the way, and then it's some of our members in law enforcement who then criticize me for wanting to house the homeless. And it's like, are you kidding? I'm trying to make your job easier rather than taking on these extra responsibilities that have no business being under your portfolio.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, I mean, you've only been there 2 months so far, but I'm assuming you're at least in the introductory phases about what you're talking about, right? And I was wondering what the reception of it is, because it's largely framing, like you just said, I'm trying to make your workload more manageable. Like a policeman didn't go become a policeman because they wanted to, harass unhoused people, right? So you would think that framing would make sense to them. They'd be like, well, yeah, I'm down with that. Mayor Thorpe's doing, right? How has that been received? It's not, I imagine it's largely framing. Are you getting, and I don't know how far along you're in the process. Like I said, you just got sworn in 2 months ago, but like, how's it feeling? How's it looking? How's it being received?
It's being received well. Again, I got my marching orders came on election day when I won, and then some of my allies won. Vice Mayor Wilson won. Clerk Ellie Householder, who was endorsed by, I believe, Senator Sanders in her race for school board, won. We have a very progressive, self-described radical on the city council now in District 1. She won. Our marching orders are very, very clear. What's interesting is that the police union, they ran a gamut on me during the campaign, but I won. And so the voters believed me, and they chose me. But that doesn't mean that we got to have an adversarial relationship with our police partners. Absolutely not. None of this works without them. But I do think it's funny and comical at the same time. That being said, one of my first actions, a few months ago, during the midst of all of this George Floyd stuff, social unrest was erupting. The city council and the Antioch school district decided to put cops back on school campuses, while everyone else in the world was doing the exact opposite. And so I voted no, and it was an interesting vote because it came down. The two people who voted against it were the two African American members on the council, and then the three people who voted for it were the three white people on the council. And it was so insensitive, so disrespectful. I was just beyond belief that even happened, that it was even brought to us for consideration. I just could not believe how insulting that was. And but my first action as mayor was to call a special meeting to rescind the resolution of having school cops on campus. Excellent. And one of my colleagues had a great recommendation that we use that money to then support mental health services and other school programming for youth in our community. That doesn't mean we don't care about school safety, because that's what they'll try to say. Oh, they don't care. The blood is on your hands. Right. No, it just means we need to be creative about how we create an environment that's safe for all of our students, not just some of our students, and to make some parents feel comfortable, not all parents feel comfortable. And so we can invest in having more site supervisors, who are the only people, by the way, who can enforce ed code. Police officers cannot. So we can have more site safety. We can certainly pay our police officers overtime to be at all large school function activities. No one is saying no to that. But to have police officers from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. at our schools, right? It's just, I look at the numbers, I look at the data, and every study I look at says that there's no meaningful impact from an outcomes perspective of having cops on school campuses. Other than that, I guess it's kind of like the blue lights on college campuses. There's no real data that says that they work, but they exist to make people, I feel like they exist to make people feel safe. Right. And I have a feeling that most of the time, people who respond to when campus police officers are responding to the blue light, it's because someone's playing a practical joke and they had too much to drink that night. Yeah.
Well, yeah, better than it be a real thing, I suppose, right? In
Exactly.
that example, yeah. Um, well, it's been a real pleasure to chat with you, Mayor Thorpe, and I admire the work you're doing and so forth. Obviously, you got on my radar, a lot of people's radar because of the Bernie shirt, but much to your credit, like I said before, you've had some tumultuous times in your early life, but you've grown and you've dedicated yourself to activism and public service, and you're principled in the issues you're talking about. In the face of adversity, you're still willing to um, you know uh, sort of build consensus and so forth, right, in a positive way. So, we should have more like you. We'd be blessed to have more like you in public office. So, thanks for taking some time to chat with me today. Is there anything that we didn't hit on that you want to talk about before I let you get back to official mayor? I'm delaying you for the next thing, before I let you get back to your.
Yes, I should say that what has informed a lot of my thinking that I didn't say, but my degree from college is actually in women's studies. So I am a feminist. I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of the ideas that I bring as a result of my experience in women's studies to public policy.
Excellent. Excellent. So what will that look like in the mayor's office? Like, how can how are you hoping to implement that policy wise? Is there anything that you have in mind?
I think some of the things that we're focused on right now are from that framework. I mean,
Right.
focusing on homelessness, focusing on on youth programming, focusing. Who gets tasked with doing this type of work? When you look at people who are out in the community doing work for homeless people, I'm sorry, it's women. When you see county workers, social workers, it's women. When you see teachers needing help in the classroom and support outside of the classroom, I'm sorry, the teacher force is dominated by women. When parents can't get home to help children with their homework, who are we really talking about? We're talking about
Right.
women. And so any relief we can provide women, mothers throughout our community, I'm all for it. I am absolutely all for it.
Excellent. Excellent. Awesome. Well, it's been a real thrill to chat with you, Mayor. Like I said, I appreciate your story and what you're doing, and Godspeed on your agenda. And we'll be watching. And when you come up for reelection and they throw some hack against you, we'll get behind you and make sure you retain the seat and so forth. So, yeah, Mayor Lamar Thorpe, it's been a real treat. Thanks for taking some
Thank
time.
you. Thank you. Thank you for having me and thinking of little old me here in little old Antioch.
Love it. I love your story. It's awesome. So
Take
keep up the
care.
good work. Godspeed, my friend.
Absolutely. You too. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.